Okay, good morning, people. I see you're all kind of popping in there on the live chat. So I see Siobhan's here, good morning, and Aliana's here, good morning. And KC, hello again. Disa, hello again. Lim is here, and Sabrina's here. Good morning, Sabrina. Pearlie's here, and Mashid is here. Good morning again, Mashid. And Manish is here again. Good morning. All right, so looks like there's about 9 people. 9 people online so far. Adalbert's here. Good morning. Caleb's here again. Good morning, Caleb. Luan's here. Good morning. Let's see. Okay, we got 13 now. Yeah, okay. That's a pretty good start. So, yeah, I hope everyone's doing okay. I hope everyone's ready for a little bit of a break. I know it was a short week. It was only a 4-day week, but yeah, I think we can still take our weekend, right? Today, what we'll do, Sarvish, good morning. Mr. Sarvish, good morning. What we'll do is, yeah, today we'll finish this sort of discussion about culture that we've kind of started on. And then I think that will mean that next week we can start looking at prehistory. And so we'll look at the very beginnings of humanity, the very beginnings of human culture, and that will take us to yeah, and that'll take us into sort of the full-on cultures that we know about. But this is today, I think, should be the end of just the basics of what culture is and sort of how it works. Good morning, Jenna. Good morning, Lily. And Min is here as well. Good morning. Good morning to all of you. Okay, so let's rock and roll. Let's get going. That's weird. How long have you not heard me there, people? Did that just start? Oh, that's really weird. I don't think I hit anything. Okay, but we're good now, right? For 4 minutes? Okay. From the beginning. Oh my god. Okay. Okay. So, okay, we're good now. I don't know how I hit the mute button somehow on my controller here, so I apologize for that. I will summarize what I said. What I said was that you always could. Okay, something weird happened. Something weird happened. Okay, so what I said, or what you might have missed, was I was just reviewing the idea that culture was symbolic, right? And we communicate with each other through symbols all the time without really thinking about it. And so we use words, right? Every word is a symbol for a thing or an action or a concept. We use different hand gestures that symbolize things to the world. We picked certain clothes because those clothes symbolize something about us. They say something about us to the world. And so cultures are highly symbolic, and the way that humans communicate with each other is also highly symbolic. And all of those symbols and meanings are kind of connected to one another. And so it's a very complicated way in which humans communicate. But of course, it allows us to communicate things that no other animal can share with another, right? We can communicate all kinds of things. I think that's what I said. Okay. The second characteristic of culture is that culture is learned. And so I introduced this probably new word to you here, enculturation. And that's the process of transmitting cultural learning from one generation to the next. And that's a critical part of what it is to be human, right? If you think about it, what an advantage it is for creatures like us humans to be able to learn things. And so a person can learn all kinds of things for 60 or 70 or 80 years, however long they live. And then they can take all that knowledge and they can transmit it to another generation. They can teach it to their children and to their grandchildren, right? Very, very few other animals can actually pass any kind of knowledge from one generation to another. But we can learn things and then we can pass them on, right? And that's a huge, huge advantage for human beings, the ability to learn and then to pass on that learning so the next generation doesn't have to start from square one, right? Doesn't have to start from scratch. And so in the process of enculturation, we learn all of the cultural symbols that we need. We learn cultural meanings, we learn beliefs, we learn norms. So what sort of behavior is acceptable to our culture and what sort of behavior is not. And so those behaviors can be either proscribed, so things that are not allowed, or they can be prescribed, things that we should do. And again, all of us have been through this process of enculturation. We've all sort of received or were in the process of receiving the sort of software of our culture. Yeah, and so we talked yesterday about different ways in which we are given cultural knowledge. And I said sometimes that happens directly. So sometimes our parents or our grandparents will teach us certain things and they'll say, this is the way we do this, or this behavior is not allowed or not acceptable. Often we are taught cultural lessons directly, but those lessons are always reinforced within a culture sort of in hidden ways. And that's part of the reason why we talked about the chess game and the football game yesterday, because both of those things have cultural lessons kind of baked into them. And when people play them, the game itself reinforces the cultural lessons that we've already learned. And it's not just games that do this, it's all aspects of culture. And so sometimes we're taught things directly, but then all of the other things in our culture tend to reinforce those beliefs. And so as a result, as we sort of grow up in a culture and as we learn more and more, the more those lessons are reinforced, the more that we come to see those things as natural and normal and kind of just the way that the world is. Hey, Ginny. The more we see them as the way that the world is. And so increasingly, as we sort of grow up and as we become more enculturated, culture starts to act like a lens, okay? So kind of like the lens in your glasses if you wear glasses. Our culture becomes a way in which we see the world. We see the world through our cultural beliefs and values, and we interpret the world based on those beliefs and values. And so, again, culture is very important, not only because it teaches us how to interact with our social and physical environment, not just because it actually contributes to the development of our brain, the physical development of our brain, but culture also winds up being a way in which we see the world. And once we kind of learn these cultural values, it becomes very difficult to sort of take off those lenses. In some ways, we will always interpret the world and other people's actions. To some degree, we'll always interpret those through our own cultural lens, because that's how we've come to understand the world, right? Yeah, so we talked about a few lessons in the chess game. We said that within this game, it's a metaphor for warfare. We said that this is a game that people actually try to win. And so the goal of this game is not cooperation or equality. It's more about defeating your opponent. This is a game that values strategy. And this is a game that maybe reinforces a certain type of social order and helps people to see it as natural. And so this is a social order where there's lots of little people, and those little people don't really have a lot of options. And then there's some people at the top of society, like kings and queens, and they have more options, more ability to do things, and maybe even they're more valuable. Certainly they're more valuable in the game. And so we took those lessons and we applied it to the Kwakwaka'wakw. We talked about how they initiate people into the cannibal bird, the secret society of the cannibal birds. And again, we said that even though that seemed like a strange ritual to outsiders, it is part of the enculturation process for the Kwakwaka'wakw. It reinforces cultural lessons that they already know and understand. And so we said that in this ritual, there was a very close comparison between the way that the Kwakwaka'wakw live their lives, and so hunting and gathering and then storing a lot away for the winter and having to make sure that they didn't overeat, because then they'd run out of food. So Kwakwaka'wakw have to kind of tame their hunger. In this ritual, they tame this young man who's kind of acting like a wild animal at the beginning of it. And finally, there's a comparison between taming the sort of negative aspects of ourselves, right? So greed and jealousy and selfishness and things that, if we don't control them, can hurt other people, right? They can damage other people and they can damage the community. But the Kwakwaka'wakw say, look, we have the ability to control those negative things in ourselves, just like we tame this young man in this ritual, and just like we can control our own hunger during the winter so that we don't run out of food, right? All of those kind of cultural lessons are reinforced. They're all the same, and they show up in different ways, in different contexts. And so it becomes a very strong part of Kwakwakwa culture because of the way that that lesson shows up over and over and over again in different ways. Yeah. And so then yesterday we talked about the football game. We talked about the idea that this might say something about what's desirable for men and women in society. American society might see kind of the ideal man as kind of strong and tough and muscular, and might see the ideal woman as kind of young and pretty and kind of supportive of the men, sort of thing. Okay, so let's get on to some new stuff here. The third aspect of culture, or dimension of culture, I wanted to talk about with you was the idea that culture was integrated. To be integrated means to be interconnected. And so what we want to understand about culture here is that culture is a system. So it's a bunch of different parts that work together to meet the needs of the group. And so one of the analogies I kind of like to use here is that of a car. And so if you think of a car is a system of parts, right? It's got wheels and seats and a frame and an engine with a bunch of different parts to it. And all of those parts kind of work together in order to get the car to move and carry you down the road, right? And so if you think about it, you can't simply reach into this car and randomly remove a part and expect that it will continue to operate the same way, right? Something will happen. The car's operation overall will be affected if you just reach under the hood and take out a given part. And culture is kind of the same way. All of the parts of culture are connected to each other, and if one part changes or is modified, the other parts will have to adjust. Okay. Now, in terms of dividing up what parts of culture there are, we could say that there are symbols, there are beliefs, there are values, there are artifacts, but there's also maybe a more broad way to think of it is that there are social institutions within culture. And you may have heard of social institutions already, maybe in other classes or maybe in the media, or maybe you haven't. But social institutions are kind of parts of culture, subsections of culture that operate to meet social needs, so to meet the needs of the people within a culture, and to kind of reproduce culture. And so they meet people's needs, and they also transmit culture to the next generation. And so you can see here I've got listed the government is a social institution, the economy is a social institution, families are a social institution, religion is a social institution, and all of these are probably social institutions that we are very familiar with, right? Particularly in education, because we are in the midst of education right now, right? This is we are in the middle of the operation of a social institution where this institution is trying to meet the needs of people, so trying to educate the next generation and passing on culture and knowledge in the process. So let me give you an example of this, an anthropological example. So here's a group of people, a culture called the Kapuku. And the Kapuku live in this part of the world here, on the island of New Guinea in what I believe is Indonesia. Their traditional territory is in this part of the world here. And so the Kapuku traditionally live in simple villages. They're kind of simple farmers, so everybody kind of grows their own food. And if you want to be a prominent man in society, so if you want to be someone that people look up to and go to for advice, someone who people respect, someone who people listen to when they speak, if you want to be that kind of high status, important man, you need something. And the thing that you need are these things. You don't need money. You don't need a flashy car. Not that there are any cars, but you don't need a job or anything like that, or a family name. You need pigs. Good morning, Carmen. You need pigs. Pigs in this society serve a couple of purposes. Sometimes they eat them because pigs can be tasty. But mostly what the pigs are for exchange between men. And so men in this society, and actually I think in a number of societies traditionally in New Guinea, they exchange pigs in order to build social relationships. And so the idea here is that I don't get status and respect by having a lot of pigs or having a lot of money. I get status and respect by giving things away. Okay, and so the more things I actually give away, the more status I have. That's kind of how the sort of system of respect works in a culture like this. And so it's pretty cute, hey? I need pigs in order to get status if I want to be a high status guy in society. But this kind of giving of pigs that occurs within Kapuku society is connected to a number of different parts of Kapuku society. So this is a pretty simple diagram here, but here's what's going on. If I want to be a high status man in Kapuku society, I need pigs. Okay, I need to get these pigs and raise them so that I can sort of have a big party and give pigs to other men, and then I'll get status and respect. But while I have these pigs, I need to feed them, right? Pigs need to eat. And as it turns out, these pigs eat sweet potatoes. That's their preferred food in this part of the world. Now, in Kapuku society, traditional Kapuku society, sweet potatoes don't come from the store, and where they come from is gardens. And these gardens are tended by women. Okay, so women tend the gardens. Women are the ones who grow these sweet potatoes. But if I need to feed these sweet potatoes to my pigs, a random woman isn't going to just give me potatoes for no reason, right? I'm going to have to marry her. I'm going to need a wife in order to grow potatoes in her garden. She can give me these potatoes that I can use to feed the pigs, and then I can exchange these pigs with other men in the community to hopefully raise my status. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on. But if you think about it, my ability to actually get a wife in the first place is connected to my status in the community, right? If I'm the kind of person that nobody really respects, then no woman is going to want to marry me, right? And so to some degree, all of these things are connected in terms of my marriage or my ability to be married, the exchange within my household, so my wife kind of giving me these potatoes, and then me exchanging these pigs with other men to gain status. So all of these things are kind of connected. Now, if I wanted even more status, so let's say I didn't want to be one of these kind of yellow guys in the diagram. If I wanted to be the top guy, I'm going to have to give away more and more pigs, right? And so more and more pigs is going to require more and more potatoes. And so what I might want to do, and it's possible in Kapuku society, what I might want to do is actually marry another woman. I might want to marry more than one wife. And of course, that's allowed in Kapuku society. But of course, that might be a problem as well, because if you think about it, in most societies, the gender ratio is about 1-to-1, right? So there's roughly the same number of men as women. And so if I go ahead and marry 2 women or 3 women or 4 women, that means there might be 2 or 3 or 4 men in my community that can't really get married. There's no wife available for them. And as you might imagine, that's going to cause a problem, right? One, because sometimes men like to be married. B, if a man's not married, then he's going to find it difficult to participate in this pig exchange system. And so he's going to have a hard time kind of gaining status and respect in the community. And probably these young men are just going to hang around and cause problems, right? So I might want more and more status, but doing so is going to be a problem for the social order, because suddenly there's going to be some men who do not have a wife. However, culture is integrated, right? There's lots of different systems in culture, and they are all connected to each other. And so fortunately, the Kapuku, like a number of different traditional tribes in New Guinea, fortunately, they like to go to war with each other. And so their warfare is a little bit different than what we might think of it. Think of warfare. Generally, it's kind of raiding. And so the men from a certain village may get sort of dressed up like you see in their sort of traditional feathers and paint and all that. And they might go over to a neighboring village and chase people around and throw spears at each other and maybe set a few houses on fire. And sometimes somebody is killed. And if someone's killed, then that's kind of it. Everybody stops and goes home. And so it's not warfare like we're used to it, where you sort of destroy the village and kill everybody. It's not like that. It's kind of much more small scale. But the point is that in these raids, sometimes men are killed. And so what you find in Kapuku society is, in fact, the gender ratio is not 1-to-1. There actually are a few more women than men, because some men die in these raids, die in warfare. And so it allows some men to marry more than one woman. And so some men have more access to sweet potatoes, and therefore they can raise more pigs, therefore they can give away more pigs, and therefore they can become higher status in the community. So all of these things are kind of connected in Kapuku society. Their economic life, in terms of wives giving sweet potatoes to their husbands, and their husbands kind of exchanging pigs with other men. Their economic life is connected. Their economic life is connected to their social life, because those men are building social relationships, but there's also a marriage relationship happening at the same time. And the economic life and the social life is also connected to their political life, because these men are exchanging pigs in the process of trying to sort of gain status and sort of become more important than each other. And so politics and marriage partnerships, personal relationships, and the economy, all of these things are kind of connected in Kapuku society and work together. And warfare as well. Now, part of my point here was that because all of these things are connected to each other, when you change one thing, then other things have to respond. And so imagine, if you will, what happened when Christian missionaries started to come to New Guinea and started to try to convert these people to Christianity. So missionaries came and saw how these people were living their lives, and the Christians said, well, we don't think you should kill anyone, the first commandment is thou shalt not kill, and so maybe you shouldn't kill anyone, which seems simple enough and seems like it seems like a thing that people might recommend. But the fact that some men are killed in these little raids, these little warfare exercises, the fact that some men are killed is what allows some men to marry more than one woman, and it's what allows some men to rise up to be sort of the big man of the community, the head person. And so if missionaries come and they are successful in convincing these people that they shouldn't kill anyone anymore, then the gender ratio between men and women is going to equalize, right? It's going to come back to 1-to-1. So suddenly there's not more women than men, and so really there's a man can only marry one woman at a time. And so that's going to affect everything, right? That's going to affect their political system, it's going to affect their social system, it's going to affect the economy within the group. All of those things are going to be kind of thrown off balance by the simple act of missionaries arriving and saying, maybe you shouldn't kill anybody anymore. So again, culture is integrated, right? All of these things, the Kapuku's political life, their social life, and their economic system are all connected to one another. And again, a simple change like, maybe don't kill people in the other village, a simple change like that can sort of unbalance culture, and all the other parts will have to adjust in order to compensate for that. Okay, good so far? Give me a quick thumbs up or thumbs down if we're doing okay. Or any kind of emoji, just so I know you're still out there. Liana's good. Okay, good. Okay. All right. Looking good. All right. That's good. It's nice to know that people are still connected and paying attention. All right. Good stuff. Let's move on to... Woohoo! All right. Let's move on to the last part where culture is shared, okay? Now, there's a couple of things that I want to point out under this sort of heading of culture is shared. So the first part is that culture is something that's practiced by groups of people. It's not, it's something that we do together, but you can't observe culture, right? Culture it's intangible, right? It's kind of invisible. It's not a thing like this table. It's not something you can look at. And so you can't just take out your notebook and look at culture, right? What you have to do is watch how people behave with each other, what they say and what they do, and sort of build a picture of what a culture is based on that. And so anthropologists often, what they're doing is kind of extrapolating. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before. It's kind of a mathematics term, but what you're doing is you're looking at something small and limited, and then you're kind of expanding outward. You're making a generalization about the whole thing based on a small thing. And so cultural anthropologists will often go to live with people. They'll watch how people interact. They'll ask people questions. They'll listen to their answers. And then they'll try and build a picture of what a culture is based on those things. Because again, culture is not a solid thing, right? It's very, it's what we would call an imagined reality, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So again, even though culture is something we do as a group, we can really only see it happening between the interactions between people. That's where we kind of look for culture. And so we have to watch what people do and watch what people say, and then make generalizations about a culture based on based on those things. The other thing that we might be able to say about culture being shared is that some anthropologists would disagree with this, but there are some cultural universals. There are things that are a part of all cultures around the world, no matter when and where you look at them. So things like gender roles. Every culture has specific ideas about how men should behave and how men should be, and how women should behave and how women should be. In some cultures, there's more than two genders. And so you can have men, you can have women, and then you can have people that fit into a third category, or a fourth category, or a fifth category. And so depending on the culture you belong to, you might have two genders, or three, or four. But the fact that gender roles exist is common to all cultures. All cultures differentiate between men and women and maybe other genders, and all cultures have certain ideas about how these genders should be, how they should act, what they should do. But of course, those ideas differ from culture to culture. So what a man is or what a man should be in one culture is not necessarily the same as what a man should be in another culture. Same thing with some of these other cultural universals as well. The incest taboo is something that, I don't know if anthropologists like to talk about this. I don't find it that interesting, but in basically every culture around the world, there is no sex with other family members, right? So parents and kids, between brothers and sisters, there's no sexual activity that happens there, and that's common to basically all cultures. Religions and healing rituals, those are common to all cultures. All cultures have some sort of religion or spiritual practice. And of course, I think we all intuitively know that, all religions are a little bit different and spiritual practices are different. People believe different things, but all cultures have some sort of religion or spiritual practice. Mythology, all cultures have their own stories about how the world was created, stories about heroes and villains and the supernatural. All societies have marriages. Now, those marriages are different in terms of how they happen and what the responsibilities of married people are, and even how many people are within the marriage, right? Whether you live in a culture where you're only allowed to marry one person, or whether you can marry multiple people. But marriage exists in all culture. All cultures have language. All cultures have art. All cultures have dance and music and specific types of food. All cultures have games and jokes and sports and ideas about birth and death, right? These are cultural universals that we all share. And of course, the details are different, and we've talked about that already in terms of explanations of birth and death. Jokes that are funny in one culture often are not funny in another culture. So the details are all different, but cultures do have common pieces. And so if I can go back to my car analogy, cars are kind of the same, right? Cars have similar parts that work together, although those parts are unique to each car, and you can't simply take a piece out of one car and stick it into another and have it work. It doesn't go like that. But cars are similar in that they're built in a similar way, and you could probably say the same thing about cultures. Many cultures are built in similar ways. They have similar parts, but those parts work a little bit differently in each one. Okay, so where are we? Okay, I want to get into this, but I think it's probably a good time to take a little break. And so what I'll do is I'll just put up the timer here. We'll take a 10-minute break. And so when we come back, we'll discuss these two ideas of ethnocentrism and cultural relativism, because those will be important for us going forward, because there is things I want to do with them. So take a quick break, and then I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Okay, people? All right. Okay, people. So let's get back at it here. Okay. So I wanted to introduce this idea of ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. And as I mentioned, both of these things are going to be important a little bit later on, because I do want to talk about some older cultures, some sort of ancient cultures, but I also want to tie some of those ideas into the modern world. And so ethnocentrism and cultural relativism will become important in that context as we talk about some modern cultures, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So the question around these two terms, and I'll define them in a few minutes here, is when we encounter or when we study cultures that are different from our own, how should we see these other cultures? How should we react to them? How should we understand them? Okay. Now, to sort of illustrate this, I'm going to choose a culture and talk about it a little bit. And so the culture I want to talk about here are the Aztecs. And so in the comments here, has anyone heard about the Aztecs before or studied them, or are they brand new to you? What do you think? Have you ever heard of this culture before? Yes, yes, no, no. Heard of them. Heard about Aztec gold, yep. Yes, no. Okay. So a little bit of both. No. All right. Um, Aztecs limb. No. Okay. Good. This will be interesting for some of you, I think. The Aztecs are a group of indigenous people. So they're kind of a First Nations people that live or used, well, still a bit, but traditionally they lived in what's now Mexico. And so, as we'll talk about next week, prior to about 15,000 years ago, there were no people at all in North and South America. North and South America were basically totally cut off from the rest of the world. And so there was lots of animals and plants here in North America and South America, but really no people. And people start to move into North and South America again around 14 or 15,000 years ago. And so one of the groups that eventually appears from those people are the Aztecs here. We come to know about them in the 14th to 16th century, so about 1300 AD to about 1500 AD. They are famous or they're well known for a few reasons, which we'll get to in a minute. Believe it or not, and this almost sounds like it's not real, but it is. The Aztecs built a massive capital city for themselves on top of a lake, believe it or not, and I'll show you that in a second. So they're well known for that. They're also well known for their gold. They did have a lot of it, and in a way, their gold led to the demise of their culture, because when Spanish explorers started coming to Central America and South America looking for gold, they came into conflict with the cultures who were living there, and the Aztecs were one of them. And so, in a conflict with Hernando Cortez, who was a Spanish explorer and conquistador, their culture was kind of ended, and the Aztecs were kind of driven out of their city. Cortez destroyed their city after the Aztecs were driven out, and started to build a new city on top of it. And so if you go to Mexico City today, it's built right on top of the ancient Aztec city. But anyway, I'll show you some pictures here. So as you can see, this is sort of central Mexico, and the Aztecs moved into this area of the world from somewhere else. We're not really sure where they came from to begin with. We know from their stories that they left their original homeland somewhere. We don't know where that was. And they were wandering, looking in search of a new homeland. And so one of their gods, who I think it was Quetzalcoatl, but don't quote me on that. One of their gods promised them that when the Aztecs saw a cactus with an eagle on top of it and a snake in the eagle's beak, when they saw that, that was a sign from the god that that's where they should settle. That's where they should form their new homeland. And so the Aztecs were kind of wandering around for quite some time before they finally saw this omen, this eagle on a cactus with a snake in its beak. And actually, if you look at the modern flag of Mexico, you'll see exactly that thing in the middle. They've used that sort of Aztec symbol. But the Aztecs wandered for quite some time, and finally they saw this omen from the god, and they decided to settle where they saw it. But as you can see, there were a few other cultures that were already living in the area. And so there's Tlaxcala, there's Teotihuacan, Mixtec, Zapotec. There's other cultures living in the area when the Aztecs arrive. The Aztecs tried to kind of create some land for themselves, but the other cultures didn't really like them very much. And so in order to create a homeland for themselves, in order to sort of create land, well, that's literally what they did. They created land. And so they started, there was a large lake in this area, in this kind of orange area, a large, fairly shallow, fairly muddy lake. And I don't have a good diagram of this, but the Aztecs started actually building islands. And so they used trees. They cut down trees and used the log to create kind of a box. And they filled that box with dirt and rocks and sticks and all kinds of things. And so they basically they basically created a very small island. And then they created another small island and another one. And so eventually what happened is that they created huge islands in this very shallow lake. And so you can see on the screen here, this is what artists think it might have looked like. As I mentioned, it's not really there anymore because Mexico City has been built right over top of the lake. But you can see that the Aztecs have created a major feat of engineering here and have actually built an entire city, an entire island on top of this lake. And you can see they've connected their city to the mainland with these kind of causeways or roads. And they've also connected their city to a freshwater source. And so here's another artist drawing. This one's pretty stylized, of course, but you can see that there's a canal system that brings fresh water into the city. And so people could go into the center of the city every day with big clay jugs, and they could collect fresh water for themselves. The water, the water that sort of surrounds the city is not very good for drinking. It's really kind of muddy and gross, and you wouldn't want to drink it. So the Aztecs create this fantastic marvel of a city on top of a lake. And so if you want to think about a modern equivalent, you might think of Venice today, because Venice is kind of built in a very similar way. It's very shallow, but the islands are all kind of man-made. So the Aztecs arrive in this area of the world, and they build themselves this fantastic advanced city. Now, again, what I'd like us to do is use a little bit of imagination here. And so again, we'll get our our Avengers space-time GPS thing invented by Tony Stark. We'll put those on and we'll go back in time. And so maybe what we'll do is we'll go back to this Aztec city called Tenochtitlan. We'll go back to that city about, let's say about 1450 AD. So we're going to go back around 600 or 700 years. And so let's imagine that we've gone back in time and we're kind of walking around the city as anthropologists. So we've got our notebooks out. We're kind of looking around and kind of seeing what people are doing and how they're dressed and how they speak and things like that. And let's pretend we're kind of walking through the center of the city here. And so as we kind of walk through, we'll see, number one, it's a very impressive city, right? There's kind of canals that run through it, and you can see people rowing boats down the canals. You can't really see it in this picture, but there would have been a huge market in the center of the city, and so people would have been selling food that they've grown, animals that they've raised, like chickens and things like that. People would be trading for fancy stuff like feathers or clothing or jewelry. So a really fantastic market. And then we'd kind of approach these large stone buildings. And so you can see on the left side of the picture here, there's this massive temple. And the temple is devoted to two of the Aztecs' major gods, the god of rain and the god of war, I believe. And so imagine we're kind of walking by this temple. We see people kind of moving back and forth, and we're kind of very interested in, what people are wearing and what they're saying and things like that. And then we kind of look up and we see that at the top of the temple, the Aztec priests are about to make a sacrifice. And here's what we see. The Aztec priests take this person and lie them on an altar, on a stone table at the very top of that, temple. And so one priest is going to hold, don't spoil the surprise, I'm going to get there. One priest is going to hold the wrists of this person. Another priest is going to hold their ankles. And a third priest is going to take a stone knife. And so the stone knives look roughly like, roughly like this. And so they may not look like much, but they're made of flint and they're actually really sharp. And so what the priest is going to do is he's going to take this stone knife and cut this person right under here, okay? Person's still alive, by the way. He's going to cut this person open, reach in, and rip out their heart. He's going to offer the heart to the sun god, and then this person is going to be pushed off the altar, and they're going to go boom, 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 all the way down the stairs and kind of land at our feet, okay? So, having seen that kind of gruesome sight, this is something that would happen very, very commonly in the Aztec city. And in fact, here, if you look on the screen, you can see this is actually an Aztec drawing. So an Aztec person drew this, and you can see exactly that thing happening. There's a human sacrifice on the altar, and you can see the priest kind of cutting out his heart, and he's going to offer the heart to the sun god. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, you can see somebody who's already been sacrificed, and you can see somebody kind of dragging away the body. And usually what happened is the sacrificial person would be someone from a neighboring tribe who was captured in a raid or captured in warfare. And so the warrior who captured him would get to sort of take him away, and he might sort of chop up the body and send pieces to Aztec leaders who he might want to impress, or he might just eat parts of that person as well. So, having seen that, having put on our space-time GPSs and having gone back in time, and this is what we see. And so my question to you then is, what's your reaction to seeing something like this? How do you react? How do you feel? What's your reaction to seeing that? So throw something up in the comments there. How do you feel after seeing this person at the top of the temple, having their heart cut out? Apparently the hearts were still beating, by the way. And then having this body kind of pushed down the stairs. What's your reaction to that? Just out of curiosity. Okay, so oh God. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that would be super scary, I think. Chiffon and Michael both say kind of scary. Definitely a surprise, right? Definite shock. Yeah, definitely Sarvish. Keep it clean in the comments, but yeah, I agree. That would be something very shocking to see. Yeah, that would be nightmarish, right? Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that too, Ella. Seriously grossed out. Sorry for the guy, and probably run. Yeah, so definitely what's happening here is, or at least I hope so anyway, this is something that's really outside of our experience, out of our cultural experience, right? I'm going to make an assumption here. I'm pretty sure I can assume this, but I think all of us come from cultures where humans are not sacrificed, right? We don't cut people's hearts out while they're still alive. And so this is something that is really outside of our experience. It is not a practice that any of us engage in within our own cultures. And so, yeah, we are shocked, we're surprised, we're scared. We are, yeah, this is a really shocking thing for us to see. And part of our reaction might be the fact that it's really bloody and gory and gruesome, right? This is a really horrible thing to watch. But it also seems pretty cruel, doesn't it? Because, this person is alive and they're killed, right? They're murdered for, to offer their heart to the sun god. And in most cases, I should probably mention that, the people who were sacrificed were from neighboring tribes who didn't believe in the Aztec god. And so they definitely didn't volunteer to be sacrificed. They were captured for that very reason. Yeah, so we might think that this is a horrible thing, right? This is a cruel thing. And again, where I want to take this is that, yeah, this is a really shocking, extreme thing for us to witness. Is really outside of our experience. But it is similar in a way to that initiation ceremony or that initiation ritual for the Cannibal Bird Society with the Kwakwaka'wakw. Part of the problem here is that we don't quite understand what's going on. We don't quite understand the meanings and the symbols and the beliefs that the Aztecs have. And so we're kind of looking at this practice through our own cultural lens, right? We're interpreting what's happening based on our own beliefs and values. So let me give you a little bit of background to this. So for the Aztecs, within their kind of religious belief system, they believe that when the sun sets in the evening, so the sun kind of goes down, and what's happening is that the sun god is entering the underworld. And when the sun god enters the underworld, there's all sorts of kind of monsters and creatures that will attack the sun god and try to kill him. And so the sun god kind of has to, fight his way through the underworld all night and try to stay alive in order to rise in the east the next morning. And so I think we can probably all agree that if the sun doesn't come up tomorrow morning, we're all in big trouble, right? we're going to have major problems if the sun does not rise tomorrow morning. And so obviously it's very important to get this thing to happen. And so the Aztecs believed, of course, that they wanted the sun to rise the next morning, but they needed to help the sun god. They needed to feed the sun god in order to make sure that the god was strong. And what was, yeah, you could sleep all day, is true. They needed to feed the sun god. They needed to keep the sun god strong. And what the gods eat, what the gods' food is human blood, human life. And so in this way, human life is a sacred thing. Human blood is food for the gods. And so the Aztecs felt that nobody should be killed or nobody should die unless that blood was then given to the gods. And so when the Aztecs sort of went to war or battled with other groups of people in the area, they actually tried not to kill anybody. They tried to capture them and bring them back so that they could be offered to the god. The sun god is a vampire. In a way, you could think of them that way, I guess. I actually never thought of that. So the Aztecs then are sacrificing people, not from the perspective that, this is that they don't care about these people and they just want to kill them. They actually believe that the Aztecs believes that human life is sacred. And if a human life is to end, it should be ended in the service of honoring the gods, right? Now, whoops. So this is where these two terms come in here. One is ethnocentrism and one is cultural relativism. And so when we are being ethnocentric, ethno has to do with ethnicity or culture, and centric has to do with, being the center of something, right? So when people are being ethnocentric, they are judging other cultures from the perspective of their own. And so that was kind of the thing that we were doing originally, right? We looked up the temple, we saw this kind of very extreme activity happening, and we had a very strong reaction to it because, again, it was something that was outside of our own experience. It's not something that our culture does. And of course, we had this understandable reaction to it. And part of that reaction was is that we were looking at that practice through the lens of our own cultural values, right? We, most of us, I think, I'm going to make an assumption here, but I think I'm okay. Most of us feel that you shouldn't kill people for just about any reason. Most of us feel that you shouldn't cut people's hearts out while they're alive, all right? And probably most of us believe that humans should not be sacrificed to the gods, right? You pray to the gods, you don't kill people for them. And so our strong reaction to this practice is linked to us viewing it through the lens of our own cultural beliefs and values. Yeah, there's two perspectives colliding, Sarvesh. That's exactly what's happening. The opposite side of that, or the opposite end of the spectrum, is when you're being culturally relativistic. And so cultural relativism is kind of the exact opposite. That's the practice of suspending judgment and trying to understand a cultural practice based on how that culture understands it. And so this is kind of the thing that an anthropologist would try to do, right? An anthropologist would look at this practice and say, okay, why are these people doing the thing that they're doing, and how do they feel about it? And so most Aztec people who might have witnessed this ceremony might have thought, oh, that's great, we're honoring the sun god, fantastic, right? And they probably wouldn't have had the same reaction to this sort of thing that we did. And so again, that's what anthropologists try to do. Anthropologists aren't technically there to judge other cultures. They're there to describe and explain them. And so an anthropologist would look at this and say, okay, well, why are these people doing what they're doing? What's the symbolism? What's the meaning? What's the belief behind the activity that I'm watching, right? And interestingly, even though we might still be having a strong reaction to this human sacrifice thing, and we might be having trouble believing that people who cut other people's hearts out value human life. Very interestingly, when the Spanish came and started to get into conflicts with the Aztecs and other cultures that were in the region, the Aztecs were actually shocked and horrified by the things that they saw the Spanish doing, because the Spanish were kind of there looking for resources, looking for riches, specifically gold. And so the Spanish would get into conflicts with the Aztecs and with other groups that lived in the area. They would get their really old-timey guns out with, the hammer and the whole thing. And they would shoot people and take their stuff. And when they did, they would just kind of leave the bodies lying where they fell. And so for the Aztecs saw this and thought, what a bunch of barbarians that they're just wastefully killing people and just taking their stuff and leaving them there. What a horrible waste of human life. And similarly, when the Spanish came to the Aztec city, they watched these sacrifices happening, and they said, oh, this is horrible. What a horrible waste of human life. And so both sides were kind of looking at the other through their own cultural lens. The Aztecs looking at the Spanish and saying, what a bunch of barbarians. They're, just killing people for no reason. And the Spanish were looking at the Aztecs and saying, what a bunch of barbarians. Look at them killing people for no reason. And so these two sides didn't understand each other because they were looking at each other through their own cultural values, right? And so both sides were being kind of ethnocentric. But of course, this is well before cultural relativism was invented. And so what's interesting, however, is that if you kind of dig below the surface with both of these cultures, there are some commonalities, right? Think about it. Both sides believed that human life was sacred, right? And so the Aztecs felt that if you were going to kill someone, they should only be killed and their lives offered to the gods, right? That's the only way in which people should be killed. If you looked at the Spanish were Christian, the Spanish were Catholics, and so Christians tend to believe that you shouldn't kill people, right? That's the first of Moses's commandments, thou shalt not kill. And so the Spanish also believed in the sacredness of human life. But both cultures believed there were circumstances in which you could kill someone. For the Aztecs, it was to sacrifice to their gods. For the Spanish, it was to, take their gold because they weren't Spanish people. And of course, both cultures believed that the gods should be honored, right? The Aztecs were in the process of sacrificing to honor their gods, And of course, the Spanish were probably praying to their own god as well, right? So interestingly, both of these cultures had, in some ways, some similar beliefs, right? They had some overlap, but the way that they expressed those beliefs was quite different. And so when they looked at each other, they saw some horrible things, but actually, in some ways, they're quite similar. They just didn't see it at the time. Now, one of the things I want us to take away from this is this is a pretty extreme example, right? And that's why I chose the Aztecs here, because their cultural practice of human sacrifice is super extreme. It's really something that none of us are familiar with. And so when you talk about cutting out people's hearts while they're still alive, it's easy to have a strong reaction to. But for modern anthropologists, and even for people dealing with different cultures, dealing with this kind of ethnocentrism, cultural relativism thing becomes a little more tricky. It becomes a little different, right? Again, we all come from different cultures. We all have different beliefs and values about and ideas about how the world works and what kind of things should be done and what kind of things shouldn't be done. But the question is that how do we deal with other people and other cultures when their beliefs seem to collide with ours, right? Like Sarvesh said, when you have cultural perspectives colliding. Here with the Spanish and the Aztecs, it ended with kind of the destruction of Aztec civilization and the Spanish, the Spanish kind of taking over the area and starting to build what would become Mexico. But in a modern world, in a modern sense, we have all kinds of cultures that are interacting with each other in probably a far greater way than they ever have before. And so a question that many countries have to solve, particularly a country like Canada or the United States, is how do we interact with, how do we get all these cultures to kind of align and agree, right? How do we deal with perspectives that are different than our own? How do we create a consensus so that people can live peacefully within a single country? That's a question that I think is still relevant for most people and for anthropologists as well. Although some anthropologists feel that they should be completely culturally relativistic, and so some anthropologists feel that we can't judge anything another culture does because some cultures have, or because as long as there's cultural justification for something, that it's okay. Other anthropologists feel that, yes, we shouldn't judge other cultures, but some things need to be, it's okay to criticize another culture. And so there's a lot of kind of complicated territory in the middle of that. And I would like to get into that with you a little bit later. I would like to talk about how we can interact with and respect other cultures in a way that kind of benefits everyone. But again, we'll get into that later. But for today, I just wanted to introduce those two concepts and to say that they're kind of two sides of a continuum, right? And so people who are really ethnocentric tend to look at other cultures, tend to look down at other cultures, right? They judge other cultures by their own values. People who are pretty strongly racist or kind of religiously intolerant might be on that edge of the spectrum where they're being ethnocentric. And then being culturally relativistic means that, you're always, you're not judging other cultures, you're just trying to understand them. And then of course there's a lot of room in the middle. So I just wanted to kind of point that out to you. It's something that we definitely will come back to a little bit later in the class. Okay, little bit of homework. It's very easy though. if you remember from yesterday and a little bit from today, we were talking about two things. The idea that culture is symbolic and that culture is learned, right? Culture is something that we are taught by other people, but also by things, right? Meaning is contained within things and within practices. And so here's what I'd like you to do. It's a very easy little homework assignment. It's really low stakes, low key. Don't panic about it. Do it, but don't panic about it. What I'd like you to do is take a picture of something or get a picture of something that is culturally meaningful to you. So something that has some sort of symbolic meaning, either within your culture or within any culture, okay? It's better if it's yours because you can probably speak to it more accurately. But yeah, I'm looking for a cultural object. And what I want you to do is underneath that picture, you can search for it if you don't have a picture. It'd be really cool if it was your picture, but if you need to look for something, that's okay. And then I'd like you to just write a few sentences that describe what this kind of object or practice is, and what's it kind of used for, okay? So what is this thing? And so if we think about the chess game, it's a board game, right? People play it to have fun. The second thing I want you to tell me is a little bit about the cultural value or meaning or lessons that are in this thing, okay? So what is this object, what meaning does this object have? What is it trying to tell us or teach us, or what does it symbolize? And then finally, if it's not too personal, I'd be curious to know what this object means to you. So obviously it has a cultural meaning, but is it connected to you and your life in some sort of meaningful or important way? Okay, that's kind of what I'd like you to do. And it's just a very simple thing. Maybe the easiest thing to do is just to put it in a little Word document, so you can just drop your picture in there and just write a little blurb below it, and then that would be okay. And if you could email that to me, that would be great. Maybe by Sunday night, if that's possible, just to give you enough time to do it. Again, it's a pretty simple thing. Don't panic too much about it. But I would be curious to see what you come up with, some sort of cultural object that has meaning, that has a lesson, kind of a meaning or a lesson or an idea sort of within it. And then what's it trying to tell us, and what does it mean? What does it mean to you? And obviously what it means to you, there's no right answer for that, right? Let me see, I see lots of comments here. Yeah, so email it to me. Okay. What if there's multiple objects, but they have the same purpose? Just pick one. It's okay. 3 to 4 sentences total. So it's just a really short thing. If you want to write a little more, it's okay. I won't stop you, but it's just a short little thing. Can I download it? Yeah, you can find the picture online if you want. Again, it'd be cool if it was your picture, but I understand you might not have a picture ready to go for this, so that's okay. Can you show us a picture again, please? Yeah, and I'll post it as well. Actually, I'll post it in. I'll post this in Microsoft Teams, but I'll also post the slides in Student Portal, so you'll have both of them. Yeah, and so that's kind of what I would like you to do. And again, it's a very simple thing. You know, don't spend hours on it. Like, this should probably take you 15 minutes or something to do. It's a very simple little thing. Okay. So I'll post that in Microsoft Teams just in a few minutes, and I'll post the lecture slides as well. The last thing I would like to ask is, in Microsoft Teams, I'm going to start a meeting in a few minutes. And what I'd like you to do is, if you're someone who's not in Vancouver's time zone. So if you're in Vancouver, don't worry about this. And Adalbert, I think you're in Kamloops, so you don't have to worry about this as well. But if you're someone who is not in Vancouver's time zone, if you're in another country, can I get you to join that Microsoft Teams meeting? I just want to talk to you for 2 minutes and just make sure we're okay. All right. For the rest of you, if you're in Vancouver, if you're in Vancouver's time zone, you're totally fine. Okay. Other than that, I think that's about all. I think that's about all I have for you. So do your homework, email it to me by Sunday night. Again, don't spend hours on it. It's just a really short, 15-minute thing to do. So that's all it is. It's not a big thing. It's just a little thing. Okay. Other than that, again, if you're not in Vancouver, join me in the Teams meeting in 2 minutes. Other than that, thank you for participating so much this morning. That was great. And I hope you have a really good weekend. Relax if you can. Hopefully you don't have too much schoolwork to do. Yeah. And I'll see you all on Monday. Okay. So see you. Bye.